The bullet that shattered the saloon window missed Zelda Kane's face by 3 inches, and she knew exactly who had fired it. She dropped to the floor behind the mahogany bar, her heart hammering against her ribs as screams erupted throughout the Golden Rose Saloon. The year was 1883, and Chloride, Arizona, was supposed to be civilized now, supposed to have law and order. But Zelda had learned the hard way that civilization only extended as far as a man's money and influence could reach. Marcus Thornton had both in abundance, and he had decided 6 months ago that Zelda Kane belonged to him, whether she agreed or not. "Everybody out," bellowed Sam Garrett, the saloon owner, his face red as a tomato. "Show's over for tonight." Zelda stayed crouched behind the bar, her jade-green dress pooling around her on the dusty floor. She could hear the hurried shuffle of boots, the rustle of skirts, the nervous murmurs of patrons eager to avoid trouble. Through the gap between the bar and the wall, she watched their feet disappear through the batwing doors until only Sam's polished boots remained, pacing back and forth. "You can get up now, Zelda," Sam said, his voice weary. "He's gone." She rose slowly, smoothing down her dress with trembling hands. At 22 years old, she had been working at the Golden Rose for 4 years, ever since her father's ranch had failed and fever had taken both her parents within a week of each other. Saloon work was not respectable, but it kept her fed and housed, and Sam was a decent man who did not demand more from his girls than serving drinks and providing pleasant conversation. Marcus Thornton, however, believed every woman in Chloride had a price, and he had been furious to discover that Zelda would not name hers. "That's the 3rd time this month," Sam said, examining the shattered window. "I cannot keep replacing glass, Zelda. It's expensive as hell to freight it out here. I know." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'm sorry, Sam." "It is not your fault that Thornton is a bastard," Sam said, but his tone suggested he blamed her at least a little. "But something has got to give. Talk to Marshal Devine." "File a complaint." Zelda laughed, a bitter sound. "The Marshal? Sam, you know as well as I do that Thornton owns half this town, including the Marshal's loyalty." "Then what are you going to do? Wait until his aim improves?" She had no answer for that. Instead, she helped Sam sweep up the broken glass, her mind racing through options she had already exhausted. She could leave Chloride, but she had no money for the stage and nowhere to go. She could marry someone else, but no decent man wanted a saloon girl for a wife, and the indecent ones were worse than Thornton. She could kill Thornton herself, but that would earn her a noose. The next morning, Zelda walked to the Marshal's office anyway, clinging to a thread of hope that Sam might be right. The sun was already brutal at 8 in the morning, turning Chloride's main street into a ribbon of dust and heat. The town sat in a valley surrounded by mountains rich with silver, and the mines had brought men flooding in, men with dreams of wealth and few scruples about how they obtained it. Marshal Elijah Devine sat behind his desk, his silver badge catching the light from the window. He was 50 years old with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He looked up when Zelda entered, and something like sympathy flickered across his face before it hardened into professional distance. "Miss Kane," he said, "what can I do for you?" She explained about the shooting, about the months of harassment, about the fear that kept her awake at night. Marshal Devine listened, his fingers drumming on the desk, and when she finished, he sighed. "You have proof that Marcus Thornton fired that shot." "I saw him outside the window just before. Did you see him with a gun in his hand? Did anyone else witness him firing?" Zelda's hands clenched in her lap. "No, but then there is nothing I can do." The Marshal's voice was not unkind, but it was final. "Marcus Thornton is a respected businessman in this town. I cannot arrest him based on suspicion." "He is going to kill me," Zelda said, her voice breaking. "Now, I do not think he is going to kill me, and you are going to let him because he pays you better than justice does." Marshal Devine's face flushed. "Watch your tongue, Miss Kane. I am not on any man's payroll, but the law requires evidence and you have not provided any. My hands are tied." "Then what am I supposed to do?" The marshal spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Stay away from him. Do not provoke him. Perhaps find employment elsewhere, somewhere less public than a saloon." Zelda stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "So no law would help a saloon girl. I understand, Marshal. Thank you for making that clear." She walked out before he could respond, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed in public. The street was busier now, miners and merchants going about their business, and none of them met her gaze. Everyone in Chloride knew about Marcus Thornton's obsession with her, and everyone had decided it was not their problem. She was halfway back to the Golden Rose when she heard the voice. That was a waste of time, was it not? Zelda turned to find a man leaning against the post outside the general store. She had seen him around town for the past few days, a newcomer who had not yet revealed his business in Chloride. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that brushed his collar and eyes the color of coffee. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt that sat low on his hips, positioned for a quick draw. "Excuse me," she said, "the marshal." He pushed off from the post and walked toward her with an easy, confident stride. "I could hear you from outside. He is not going to help you. Were you eavesdropping on a private conversation? The door was open, and you were not exactly whispering." He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands loose at his sides. "Name is Xander Voss. I am new to Chloride, but I have already learned plenty about Marcus Thornton. Then you know to stay away from me if you want to avoid trouble. I am not much concerned with avoiding trouble." His mouth quirked in something almost like a smile, but his eyes remained serious. "What I am concerned with is men who think they can terrorize women without consequence." Zelda studied him warily. Xander Voss had the look of a cowboy, someone who had spent years in the saddle under an unforgiving sun. There was something hard in his face, a set to his jaw that spoke of violence survived and dealt in return. But there was also something else, something that might have been kindness if the world had not beaten most of it out of him. "Why would you care what happens to me?" she asked. "Because somebody should." He said it simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And because I have a sister back in Texas who works in a saloon, and I would hope that if she needed help, someone would provide it. I do not need a white knight, Mr. Voss." "Good, because I am not one." He tilted his head, studying her face. "But what you do need is someone willing to stand between you and Thornton, someone he cannot buy or intimidate. I am offering to be that person." "Why, does it matter?" "Yes," Zelda said. "It matters very much. Men do not help women like me without expecting something in return." Xander Voss's expression darkened. "I am not most men, Miss Kane, and I am not asking for anything except the chance to do what is right. The marshal said no law would help a saloon girl. Well then, I will be her justice myself." The words hung in the hot morning air between them, and Zelda felt something shift in her chest, some tightly wound spring of fear loosening just a fraction. She did not trust easily anymore, could not afford to, but there was something in Xander Voss's steady gaze that made her want to try. "I do not even know you," she said. "Then let me buy you breakfast and we can fix that." She should have said no. She should have walked away and dealt with Marcus Thornton on her own, the way she had been dealing with him for months. But she was tired, so tired of being afraid, and Xander Voss's offer felt like the first kindness anyone had shown her in a very long time. "All right," she said. "Breakfast." They walked to the small restaurant at the edge of town, a place called Rosie's that served eggs and bacon and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Zelda was acutely aware of the stares that followed them, of the whispers that started the moment she sat down across from Xander Voss. By noon, everyone in Chloride would know that Zelda Kane had been seen with the mysterious stranger, and by evening Marcus Thornton would know too. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange sense of defiance. Xander ordered for both of them, and when the food arrived, he ate with the focused efficiency of a man who had missed too many meals to take them for granted. Zelda picked at her eggs, her appetite dulled by nerves. "Tell me about Marcus Thornton," Xander said. So she did. She told him about the first time Thornton had come to the Golden Rose, how he had asked her to sit with him, and she had obliged because that was her job. She told him how his attention had grown more intense, more possessive, how he had started coming every night, how he had offered her money to leave the saloon and become his mistress. She told him about the night she had refused him outright and how his expression had changed from desire to rage in a heartbeat. "He thinks I insulted him," Zelda said. "Thinks I consider myself too good for him. Now he wants to punish me for it. What kind of man is he? Careful? Reckless?" "Careful. He owns the Silver Crown mine, the largest in the area. He is rich, educated, from a good family back east. He is used to getting what he wants through money and influence, not violence. But he is escalating," Xander said. "Yes, which means he is getting desperate." "Desperate men make mistakes." Xander leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "I have dealt with men like Thornton before. They hide behind their money and their respectability and they think that makes them untouchable. But every man has a breaking point. You are talking about provoking him. I am talking about protecting you. If Thornton knows you are not alone, if he knows there is someone willing to stand up to him, he may back down. And if he does not," Xander's eyes met hers and there was steel in them, "then I will make sure he regrets not backing down." Zelda should have been frightened by the promise of violence in his words, but instead she felt something like relief. For 6 months, she had been fighting alone, and now, for the first time, someone was offering to fight with her. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked again. Xander was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the table. "3 years ago, my sister wrote me that a rancher in her town was bothering her. She asked me to come, but I was working a cattle drive in Montana, and I figured she was exaggerating. By the time I got to Texas, the rancher had cornered her in an alley and beaten her so badly she lost the sight in one eye." "I am sorry," Zelda whispered. "So am I." His jaw tightened. "I killed the rancher and I do not regret it, but I regret not coming sooner. I regret thinking her problem was not important enough to drop everything. So when I heard you talking to the Marshal this morning, heard him tell you no law would help you, I knew I could not walk away. Not again. You killed a man for your sister, and I would do it again." He said it without bravado, just a statement of fact. "But I am hoping it will not come to that with Thornton. I am hoping he is smart enough to realize he is beaten. And if he is not, then I will be your justice, Miss Kane, however that needs to look." They finished their breakfast in silence, and when they stepped back out into the brutal Arizona sun, Zelda felt different somehow, as though a weight she had been carrying for months had been distributed across 2 sets of shoulders instead of one. It was not freedom, not yet, but it was close enough that she could almost taste it. That evening, Marcus Thornton came to the Golden Rose. He arrived just after sunset, when the saloon was beginning to fill with miners fresh from their shifts, their pockets heavy with wages and their throats parched from the dry heat. Zelda was serving drinks, moving between tables with practiced ease, when she felt the change in the room's atmosphere. Conversations died mid-sentence. Men who had been laughing fell silent. She turned toward the door and saw Thornton standing just inside, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He was a handsome man by conventional standards, tall and well-dressed, with blonde hair slicked back from a high forehead. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. "Zelda," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "we need to talk. I am working, Mr. Thornton." "Then stop working. I will pay Sam for your time. I am not interested in talking to you." His smile tightened. "I am not asking, Zelda, I am telling you. We need to discuss your behavior this morning." So he already knew about her breakfast with Xander. Of course he did. Chloride was too small for secrets. "I had breakfast with a friend," Zelda said, keeping her voice steady. "There is nothing to discuss. A friend." Thornton took a step closer, and the men around the room shifted uncomfortably. No one would intervene, Zelda knew. They were all too afraid of Thornton's power. "You mean the drifter who just rode into town? You are making friends quickly, are you not? What I do is none of your concern." "Everything you do is my concern." His voice dropped to something darker. "I have been patient with you, Zelda. I have given you time to come to your senses, but my patience is running out." "Then I suggest you find someone else to fixate on, Mr. Thornton, because I will never be interested in you." The slap came so fast she did not have time to dodge it. His hand connected with her cheek, snapping her head to the side and filling her mouth with the taste of copper. She staggered, caught herself on a nearby table, and looked up to find Thornton looming over her, his face flushed with rage. "You will learn respect," he hissed. That was when Xander Voss stepped through the batwing doors. He must have been waiting outside, must have seen Thornton enter and anticipated trouble. He crossed the saloon in 3 long strides, grabbed Thornton by the shoulder, and spun him around. Thornton had time to look surprised before Xander's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling across the sawdust-covered floor. The room exploded into chaos. Men shouted, chairs scraped back, and Sam came running from behind the bar. Xander stood over Thornton, his hand hovering near his gun, his expression cold and hard. "Get up," Xander said. Thornton touched his bleeding lip, his eyes wide with shock. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are. You are the man who just hit a woman half your size." "Now get up. You are making a mistake, Cowboy. I own this town." "You do not own me." Xander's voice was quiet, deadly. "And you do not own her. If I see you lay a hand on Miss Kane again, I will kill you. Is that clear enough, or do I need to use smaller words?" Thornton climbed to his feet, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. "You have just signed your death warrant. Maybe, but you will be the first one in the ground." Xander turned his back on Thornton, a deliberate insult, and walked to where Zelda stood. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her hand pressed to her stinging cheek. "You should not have done that. Probably not. But I did, and I am not sorry." He glanced back at Thornton. "You should leave now before I change my mind about letting you walk out of here." Thornton looked around the room, at the miners and gamblers who were watching him with varying degrees of sympathy and amusement. He was used to fear, to deference, and the fact that no one was coming to his defense clearly shook him. He straightened his jacket, wiped the blood from his lip, and walked out of the saloon with his head held high, but Zelda could see the fury in every line of his body. "He is going to come after you," she said to Xander once Thornton was gone. "Let him try. You do not understand. He has money, power, men on his payroll. He could have you killed and no one would even investigate." Xander turned to look at her, and his expression softened. "Zelda, I have been dodging bullets since I was 16 years old. I have fought in range wars, dealt with cattle rustlers and claim jumpers and every other kind of criminal the West has to offer. Marcus Thornton does not scare me. Well, he scares me, I know, but he will not hurt you again, I promise you that. It was a promise he could not possibly keep, but Zelda wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. She touched her cheek, felt the heat of the bruise already forming, and tried not to cry. She was so tired of being afraid, so tired of fighting alone, and Xander Voss had appeared in her life like something out of a dime novel, offering protection and justice in equal measure. "Why are you still here?" she asked. "In Chloride, I mean. You said you were just passing through." Xander hesitated, then said, "I was. But then I heard about you and Thornton, and I figured I would stay a few days, make sure things settled down. Things are not going to settle down, not now. Then I guess I will be staying longer than a few days." He said it so matter-of-factly, as though altering his entire life to protect a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. Zelda stared at him, this tall, quiet cowboy with kind eyes and a dangerous reputation, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, a seed planted in the parched soil of her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. Xander smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "You are welcome, Miss Kane. Now let me get you some ice for that cheek." The days that followed fell into a strange new pattern. Xander took a room at the boarding house 2 doors down from the Golden Rose, and he spent his days in the saloon, usually nursing a beer at a corner table where he could watch the door. His presence was a statement, a line drawn in the sand, and Marcus Thornton seemed to understand it. The mine owner stayed away from the Golden Rose, but Zelda could feel his rage simmering just beneath the surface of the town's daily routine. She learned more about Xander during those days. He had been born in Missouri, had gone west at 16 to escape, a father who believed problems were best solved with his fists. He had worked cattle drives, hired his gun out to ranchers during disputes, and drifted from town to town without putting down roots. He was 26 years old and had never been married, though Zelda suspected there had been women, brief connections that faded when he rode on to the next town. "You ever get tired of moving?" she asked him one evening when the saloon was quiet. They were sitting together at a table near the window, the same window Marcus Thornton's bullet had shattered weeks earlier. The glass had been replaced, but Zelda could still see the scar in the wood frame. "Sometimes," Xander admitted, "but I am not sure I know how to stay in one place anymore. I have been moving for so long that stopping feels wrong." "What would make you stop?" He looked at her, and something passed between them, something electric and dangerous. "I am not sure yet, but I am starting to think I might be figuring it out." Zelda's breath caught in her throat. She was acutely aware of how close he was sitting, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his eyes seemed to see straight through to the part of her she kept carefully hidden. She had sworn off men after coming to work at the Golden Rose, had built walls around her heart to protect it from the casual cruelty and empty promises that seemed to define every interaction in Chloride. But Xander Voss was different. He saw her, truly saw her, and he did not flinch from what he found. "Xander," she started, but he shook his head. "You do not have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." "Know what?" "That I am not protecting you because I feel obligated. I am doing it because I want to. Because spending time with you is the best part of my day." Her hand found his across the table, their fingers intertwining. "You are the best part of mine, too." They sat like that for a long moment, the saloon's noise fading into background static, and Zelda allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not afraid, where she did not have to look over her shoulder every time she stepped outside, where a man like Xander Voss stayed instead of drifting on to the next town. The fantasy shattered 3 days later when Marcus Thornton made his move. It was mid-afternoon, the hottest part of the day, when most of Chloride retreated indoors to escape the brutal sun. Zelda was walking back from the general store with a basket of supplies when she heard the footsteps behind her. She turned to find 3 men blocking the alley, their faces unfamiliar, but their intentions clear. They were hired guns, brought in from somewhere else, and they had been paid to hurt her. She dropped the basket and ran. The men gave chase, their boots pounding on the hard-packed dirt. Zelda's skirts tangled around her legs, slowing her down, and she knew with horrible certainty that she was not going to make it to the saloon before they caught her. She screamed for help, but the street was empty, everyone sensibly indoors, and her voice seemed to disappear into the shimmering heat. A hand grabbed her arm, jerking her backwards. She fell hard, pain exploding through her shoulder, and looked up to see one of the hired guns standing over her, a cruel smile on his face. "Mr. Thornton sends his regards," the man said. Then a gunshot cracked through the air, and the man stumbled backwards, a red stain spreading across his chest. He hit the ground and did not move. Zelda scrambled backwards, her heart pounding, and saw Xander Voss standing at the mouth of the alley, his gun drawn and smoking. The other 2 hired guns went for their weapons, but they were too slow. Xander fired twice more, quick and efficient, and both men fell. The whole thing had taken maybe 5 seconds, and now 3 bodies lay sprawled in the Arizona dust, and Xander was walking toward her with his gun still in his hand. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "No, I do not think so." She was shaking so badly she could barely speak. Xander holstered his gun and helped her to her feet. His hands were gentle, but his face was hard as granite. "Thornton sent them, I know. Then this ends now." "Xander, wait." But he was already striding toward the main street, toward the Silver Crown mine office where Marcus Thornton spent his afternoons managing his empire. Zelda ran after him, her legs unsteady, fear and adrenaline making her clumsy. People were emerging from buildings now, drawn by the gunshots, and she could see Marshal Devine hurrying toward the alley where the bodies lay. "Xander, please," she called. "Do not do this. If you kill him, they will hang you." "I am not going to kill him," Xander said without slowing. "I am just going to make sure he understands what happens if he comes after you again." They reached the mine office, a sturdy building of wood and stone that stood apart from the ramshackle structures around it. Xander kicked the door open and walked inside like he owned the place. Marcus Thornton sat behind a massive oak desk, papers spread in front of him, and he looked up with an expression of mild annoyance that turned to alarm when he saw Xander's face. "Your men are dead," Xander said flatly. "All 3 of them. Zelda is fine, in case you were wondering." Thornton recovered quickly, his features smoothing into a mask of innocence. "I have no idea what you are talking about. Do not insult my intelligence. You hired those men to hurt her, maybe kill her. It was a coward's move, Thornton, and it failed. You cannot prove anything." Xander crossed the room in 2 strides, planted his hands on Thornton's desk, and leaned in close. "I do not need to prove anything. I am not the law. I am just the man who is going to make your life a living hell if you ever go near Zelda Kane again. You are threatening me. No. I am promising you. Touch her, look at her wrong, even think about her, and I will put a bullet in you. And before you start calculating whether your money can protect you, let me save you the trouble. It cannot. I have nothing to lose, Thornton. I am a drifter with a gun and a grudge, and that makes me very dangerous." Thornton's composure cracked, just for a moment. Zelda saw fear flicker across his face, genuine fear, and she realized that Marcus Thornton had never encountered someone he could not buy or intimidate. Xander Voss was a creature completely outside his experience, and it terrified him. Marshal Devine will hear about this, Thornton said, his voice shaking slightly. Go ahead and tell him. Tell him about the 3 men you hired to attack Zelda. Tell him how I killed them in self-defense. See how sympathetic he is. Xander straightened, his expression cold. This is your one warning, Thornton. Stay away from her. If I have to come back here, I will not be interested in conversation. He turned and walked out, taking Zelda by the arm and guiding her back into the blinding afternoon sun. They made it halfway down the street before Marshal Devine intercepted them, his face flushed and angry. Xander Voss, I need to ask you some questions about the shooting in the alley. Those men attacked Miss Kane. I defended her. That is all you need to know. There are 3 dead bodies, Voss. I cannot just ignore that. Then do not ignore who sent them. Xander's voice was hard. Ask Marcus Thornton where he was this afternoon. Ask him why 3 strangers showed up in town yesterday and went straight to his office. The marshal's jaw tightened. I cannot arrest Marcus Thornton based on speculation. Of course you cannot, because he pays you too well. Xander's contempt was palpable. But those men are dead, and they will not be hurting anyone else. If you have a problem with that, Marshal, I suggest you take it up with your conscience. They walked away, leaving Marshal Devine standing in the street, and Zelda could feel the entire town watching them. By tomorrow, everyone would know what had happened, would know that Xander Voss had killed 3 men to protect the saloon girl, and opinions would be divided. Some would call him a hero. Others would call him a killer. Most would just be grateful the violence had not touched them. Back at the Golden Rose, Sam took one look at Zelda's face and poured her a whiskey. She drank it in one burning gulp, her hands still shaking. Xander sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring, and she found herself leaning against him without thinking about it. He put his arm around her shoulders and she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of leather and gunpowder and something uniquely him. It is over, Xander murmured against her hair. Thornton will not come after you again. How can you be sure? Because he is a coward at heart. He likes hurting people weaker than him, but he does not have the stomach for a real fight. I saw it in his eyes. He is done. Zelda wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the nightmare was over, that she could walk the streets of Chloride without fear, that Marcus Thornton had finally accepted defeat. But a part of her, the part that had learned to always expect the worst, could not quite let go of the dread that had been her constant companion for 6 months. You killed 3 men today, she said quietly. I did. Does it bother you? Xander was silent for a moment. It bothers me that I had to, but I am not sorry they are dead. They were going to hurt you, maybe kill you. I could not let that happen. Because of your sister. At first, maybe, but not anymore. He pulled back slightly so he could look at her face. Zelda, I am not protecting you out of guilt or obligation. I am doing it because I care about you. These past few weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has been the closest thing to happiness I have felt in years. Her breath caught. Xander, I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but out here, time moves differently. You cannot afford to waste opportunities when you might be dead tomorrow. That is a grim way to look at things. It is a realistic way. His thumb brushed her cheek, gentle and warm. I am not good at pretty words, Zelda, but I am good at telling the truth. And the truth is, I think I am falling in love with you. The words hung between them, fragile and precious, and Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not with such raw honesty, not with such complete sincerity. She had been alone for so long, fighting so hard just to survive, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, to be valued, to be loved. I think I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. Xander smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made him look years younger, and he kissed her. It was soft and sweet and tentative, a question more than a demand, and Zelda answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him closer. The saloon faded away, the fear and violence and uncertainty dissolving into nothing, and for a moment, there was only the two of them, two people who had found each other against all odds in the middle of the unforgiving Arizona desert. When they finally pulled apart, Sam was standing behind the bar with his arms crossed and a knowing smile on his face. "About time," he said. Zelda laughed. The sound startled out of her and realized it was the first time she had laughed in months. Xander took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and she held on tight, anchoring herself to this moment, to this feeling, to this man who had walked into her life and changed everything. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of quiet contentment. Marcus Thornton stayed away. Whether from fear or wounded pride, Zelda did not know and did not care. Xander remained at her side, a constant presence that shifted from protector to companion to something deeper and more complicated. They spent their evenings together after the saloon closed, talking until the early hours of the morning about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about the mother who had died when he was young and the father who had blamed him for it. She told him about growing up on a failing ranch, about the parents she had loved and lost, about the dreams she had given up when necessity forced her through the doors of the Golden Rose. "You regret it?" Xander asked one night. "Working at the saloon." They were sitting on the boarding house steps, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Chloride was quiet at this hour, the mines shut down for the night, the miners either drinking in the saloons or sleeping off their exhaustion. "I regret that I did not have a choice," Zelda said. "But I do not regret surviving. That is what it was, Xander, pure survival, and I am not ashamed of that. You should not be. You did what you had to do." Most people do not see it that way. Most people think saloon girls are fallen women beyond redemption. Most people are idiots. He said it so bluntly that she laughed. "You are one of the strongest, bravest people I have ever met, Zelda Kane. Anyone who cannot see that is not worth your time." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "What happens when this is all over? When Thornton gives up for good and you do not have a reason to stay in Chloride anymore?" "Who says I need a reason?" "You are a drifter, Xander. You said so yourself. You do not stay in one place." "Maybe I have been waiting for the right place." His arm tightened around her. "Or the right person. You would stay here. For me. I would go anywhere for you, stay anywhere. I told you, Zelda, I am falling in love with you. That is not something I take lightly." She turned to look at him, and in the fading light, his face was all plains and shadows, beautiful and fierce and completely hers. "I love you too. I think I have since the moment you punched Marcus Thornton. That is a strange moment to fall in love. It was the first time anyone had ever stood up for me, the first time I felt like I mattered to someone." Her voice broke slightly. "You made me feel worth protecting, Xander, worth fighting for. I did not think I would ever feel that way again." "You are worth everything," he said, and kissed her again, deeper this time with a hunger that made her pulse race. They stayed on those steps until the stars filled the sky, wrapped in each other's arms, and Zelda allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a happy ending after all. But happiness in the West was a fragile thing, easily shattered by violence and greed. It started with rumors. Whispers that Marcus Thornton was hiring more men, that he was planning something, that his humiliation at Xander's hands had not cooled his obsession, but intensified it. Zelda heard the talk in the saloon, saw the worried glances people threw her way, and felt the old fear creeping back in. She tried to tell herself that Xander was right, that Thornton was too much of a coward to try again, but doubt was a persistent companion. Xander heard the rumors too, and he took them seriously. He started carrying a second gun, a small derringer tucked into his boot, and he insisted on walking Zelda everywhere, even in broad daylight. He questioned newcomers to town, trying to identify which ones might be on Thornton's payroll, and he slept with his door unlocked so he could hear if anything happened at the Golden Rose. "You are going to exhaust yourself," Zelda told him. "I am fine. You are not sleeping. You are barely eating. Xander, you cannot protect me every second of every day. Watch me." His intensity should have frightened her, but instead it made her love him more. He was throwing himself into her protection with single-minded determination, and she knew it was because he could not bear the thought of losing someone else he cared about. She wanted to tell him that she could take care of herself, that she had been doing it for years, but the truth was, she liked having him at her side. She liked not being alone. She liked the way he made her feel safe and valued and loved. The attack came on a Tuesday night. The Golden Rose was crowded, miners spending their wages on whiskey and cards, and Zelda was serving drinks when she noticed the smell. Smoke. Not tobacco smoke, but something sharper, more acrid. She turned toward the back of the saloon and saw flames licking up the far wall, bright and hungry and spreading fast. "Fire!" someone shouted, and panic erupted. Men stampeded toward the doors, shoving and cursing, their thoughts only of escape. Zelda looked around desperately for Sam and saw him near the bar, trying to rally people to fight the flames. The heat was already intense, the smoke thick and choking, and she realized with horrible clarity that someone had set this fire deliberately. Marcus Thornton had decided that if he could not have her, no one could. "Zelda," Xander appeared at her side, his face streaked with soot. "We need to get out, now." "Sam, I will get Sam, you go." He pushed her toward the door, and she stumbled into the street, coughing and gasping for clean air. The fire had spread with terrifying speed, and flames were already breaking through the roof of the Golden Rose, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. People were running for buckets, forming a chain to the town well, but Zelda could see it was hopeless. The saloon was going to burn. Xander emerged from the smoke dragging Sam, who was shouting about his business, his livelihood, everything he had worked for. They collapsed in the street, and Zelda threw her arms around both of them, relief and grief warring in her chest. The saloon might be gone, but they were alive, and that was what mattered. "Thornton did this," Sam said, his voice raw. "That bastard burned down my saloon." "I know," Xander said grimly. "What are you going to do about it?" "What I should have done 2 weeks ago." Zelda grabbed his arm. "Xander, no, if you kill him they will hang you, then I will hang, but Thornton is not getting away with this. Please." Tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the soot. "Please do not leave me. I cannot lose you too." Xander looked at her, and she saw the war raging behind his eyes. He wanted justice, wanted revenge, wanted to make Marcus Thornton pay for every ounce of fear and pain he had inflicted. But he also loved her, and the thought of leaving her was tearing him apart. "There has to be another way," Zelda said desperately. "There has to be." "What way?" "The law will not touch him. The Marshal is in his pocket. If I do not stop him, he is just going to keep hurting people. Then we leave. Tonight, we get horses and we ride out of Chloride and we never come back. Zelda, I do not care about this town. I do not care about the saloon or Marcus Thornton or any of it. I care about you. I care about us. Please, Xander, do not throw your life away for revenge." He stared at her for a long moment, the fire reflected in his eyes, and then he pulled her close and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "All right," he murmured against her hair. "All right, we will leave." They packed what little they owned and bought 2 horses from the livery stable, paying triple the usual price because the owner knew they were desperate. By the time the sun rose over Chloride, they were 10 miles away, riding hard toward the horizon, leaving behind the burning ruins of the Golden Rose and the malice of Marcus Thornton. They traveled for 3 days, stopping only to rest the horses and catch a few hours of sleep. Zelda had no idea where they were going, and she did not care. As long as she was with Xander, anywhere felt like home. They talked little during those days, too tired and too focused on putting distance between themselves and Chloride, but their silences were comfortable, companionable, filled with an understanding that went beyond words. On the 4th day, they reached a small town called Prescott, nestled in the mountains of central Arizona. It was larger than Chloride, more established with real streets and brick buildings, and a sense of permanence that the mining town had lacked. Xander found them a room at a boarding house run by a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Murphy, and they collapsed onto the bed, too exhausted to do anything but sleep. When Zelda woke, the sun was low in the sky, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. Xander was sitting by the window, watching the street below, and she realized with a pang that he was still on guard, still waiting for trouble. "We are safe here," she said softly. "Are we? Thornton has money. He could send men after us. He could. But he would have to find us first, and Arizona is a big place." She crossed the room and took his hand, pulling him away from the window. "Xander, you cannot spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. We left Chloride. We left Thornton behind. We have a chance to start over." "I know. He broke off, frustration clear in his face. "I wanted him to pay, Zelda. I wanted him to understand what it feels like to lose everything." "I know. But revenge would not have brought us peace. It would have just destroyed us in a different way." She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I do not need you to be my justice anymore, Xander. I just need you to be mine." Something in him broke at those words, the tension draining from his shoulders, the hard edge softening into something gentler. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, and she felt his heart beating against hers, steady and strong. "I am yours," he whispered, "for as long as you will have me. Then I guess you are stuck with me forever." He laughed, the sound rusty but genuine, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, and Zelda felt the last remnants of fear dissolve. Marcus Thornton no longer had power over her. He was a ghost from a life she had left behind, and she refused to let him haunt her future. They settled into Prescott with surprising ease. Xander found work as a ranch hand on a cattle operation outside of town, and his skill with horses and cattle quickly earned him respect and steady wages. Zelda took a job at the town's general store, and though the pay was modest, it was honest work that did not require her to smile at drunken miners or dodge unwanted advances. For the first time in years, she felt like a person instead of a commodity, and the change was intoxicating. In the evenings, they would walk through town together, hand in hand, and Zelda marveled at how normal it felt, how right. She had spent so long surviving that she had forgotten what it was like to live, to have plans beyond the next day, to imagine a future filled with possibility instead of just more struggle. 2 months after arriving in Prescott, Xander asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the creek that ran through the edge of town, watching the water tumble over smooth stones. The air was cooler here in the mountains, a relief after the brutal heat of Chloride, and the trees provided shade that felt like a luxury. "Zelda," Xander said, and there was a nervousness in his voice she had never heard before. I have been thinking about our future, about what I want our life to look like. What do you want it to look like? I want us to have a home. A real home, not just a room in a boarding house. I want to save up enough money to buy a piece of land, maybe start a small ranch of our own. And he took a breath. I want to marry you if you will have me. Zelda's heart felt like it might burst. Xander Voss, are you proposing to me? I am. I do not have a ring, and I know I am not much of a catch. I am just a cowboy with a violent past and not much money to my name. But I love you, Zelda. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. Yes, yes, I will marry you. He kissed her then with a joy and relief that made her laugh against his mouth, and when they finally pulled apart, he was grinning like a fool. I was terrified you would say no, he admitted. Why would I say no? You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Xander. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You saved mine, too. Before I met you, I was just drifting. I did not have a purpose, did not have anything to fight for except my own survival. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something instead of just moving from town to town. We are going to build a good life together, Zelda said. I promise you that. They were married a week later in a small ceremony at the Prescott church. Mrs. Murphy stood as Zelda's witness, and one of Xander's fellow ranch hands stood as his. It was simple and quick, nothing like the elaborate weddings Zelda had sometimes imagined as a girl, but it was perfect because it was theirs. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Xander kissed her in front of God and the few people who had come to witness their vows, Zelda felt like the luckiest woman in the world. That night, in their small room at the boarding house, they made love for the first time as a married couple. It was tender and sweet and awkward in the way first times often are, but it was also filled with so much love and trust that Zelda cried. Xander held her afterwards, his hand stroking her hair, and murmured promises against her skin about the future they would build together. The months that followed were the happiest of Zelda's life. She and Xander saved every penny they could, living frugally and dreaming about the ranch they would one day own. They looked at properties on Xander's days off, evaluating land and water sources and proximity to town. It was a slow process, but neither of them minded. They were building something together, and that made every sacrifice worthwhile. A year after their wedding, they had saved enough for a down payment on a small piece of land about 5 miles outside Prescott. It was not much, just 100 acres with a creek running through it and a cabin that needed significant repairs, but it was theirs. They moved in on a sunny spring day, carrying their few possessions across the threshold, and Zelda felt like she had finally come home. They worked hard to make the ranch viable. Xander repaired the cabin and built a barn while Zelda planted a garden and learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove. They bought a few head of cattle and some chickens, and slowly, painstakingly, they carved out a life from the unforgiving Arizona landscape. It was not easy. There were droughts and illnesses and setbacks that left them exhausted and discouraged. But they faced every challenge together, and that made all the difference. When Zelda was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work, Xander would hold her and remind her how far they had come. When Xander doubted his ability to make the ranch successful, Zelda would take his hand and point out everything they had accomplished. 2 years after leaving Chloride, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her body changing in small but unmistakable ways, but she waited until she was certain before telling Xander. She chose a quiet evening when they were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Xander, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of joy and fear. I have something to tell you. He looked at her, concern flickering across his face. What is it? Are you all right? I am fine. Better than fine, actually. I am. She took a breath. I am going to have a baby. For a moment he just stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and genuine that it transformed him completely. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, and she could feel him trembling. A baby, he whispered. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Happy. Zelda, I am. He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes bright with tears. I did not think I could be this happy. I did not think I deserved it. You deserve everything good in the world, Xander Voss, and now we are going to bring a new life into it. They spent the rest of the evening talking about names and plans, and all the ways their life was about to change. Xander was both excited and terrified, worried about whether he would be a good father, whether they could afford another mouth to feed. Zelda shared his fears, but she also felt an overwhelming sense of rightness. This baby was proof that they had survived, that they had built something beautiful out of the ashes of their old lives. The pregnancy was difficult. Zelda was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, and the Arizona heat made everything worse. Xander hovered over her like a worried mother hen, doing twice the work to spare her any strain, and Zelda loved him fiercely for it, even as she insisted she was not made of glass. In the winter of 1886, on a cold December night, Zelda went into labor. Xander rode to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah, who had delivered half the babies in Prescott. The labor was long and brutal, stretching into the early hours of the morning, and there were moments when Zelda thought she might die from the pain. But Xander stayed at her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and his presence gave her the strength to keep going. When the baby finally came, it was a boy, red-faced and screaming with impressive lungs. It is a boy, Sarah announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. A healthy boy. Zelda collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated, and reached for her son. Sarah placed him in her arms, and Zelda stared down at the tiny, perfect face, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. This was her child, hers and Xander's, a living symbol of everything they had fought for and survived. What should we name him? Xander asked, his voice rough with emotion. Zelda thought for a moment, then said, Thomas, after my father. Thomas Voss, Xander smiled. I like it. He leaned down to kiss her forehead, then gently touched the baby's cheek. Hello, Thomas. I am your father, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to give you a good life. The baby yawned, already falling asleep, and Zelda felt tears slide down her cheeks. She had come so far from the frightened saloon girl in Chloride, had survived so much pain and fear, and now she was here, in a home she had helped build, with a husband who loved her and a son who was the most precious thing she had ever held. Life with a baby was exhausting and chaotic and absolutely wonderful. Thomas was a colicky infant who seemed to sleep only when Zelda was desperate to rest, but she did not care. She spent hours just watching him, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way he would grip her thumb with surprising strength. Xander was a natural father, gentle and patient in ways Zelda had not expected, and watching him with their son made her fall in love with him all over again. The ranch continued to grow. They added more cattle, improved the cabin, and built a small chicken coop that Zelda tended with pride. Money was always tight, but they were making it work, and every small success felt like a victory. Zelda sometimes thought about Chloride, about Marcus Thornton and the golden rose and the life she had left behind, but those memories felt distant now, like something that had happened to a different person. When Thomas was 2 years old, Zelda became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the summer of 1889, she gave birth to a daughter they named Alina after Xander's mother. Alina was a quiet baby, content to lie in her cradle and watch the world with serious blue eyes, and Thomas was immediately protective of his little sister. Watching her children play together, Zelda felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. The years passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed Xander everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for the cattle. Alina was quieter but equally determined, and she had a gift for numbers that Zelda nurtured by teaching her to read and write. The ranch prospered, slowly but steadily, and Xander and Zelda became respected members of the Prescott community. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander surprised Zelda with a gift. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, the children playing in the yard, when he handed her a small wooden box. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it and see." Inside was a ring, simple gold with a small diamond that caught the fading sunlight. Zelda stared at it, then at Xander. "I never gave you an engagement ring," he said. "I was too poor and too worried you would say no. But I have been saving for years, and I wanted you to have something that showed how much you mean to me." "Xander, you did not have to, I wanted to." He took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. "I know it is late, but better late than never, right?" Zelda threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much. You know that, right? I know, and I love you more every day." They sat together as the sun set, their children playing nearby, and Zelda reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the fear and violence of Chloride to the peace and prosperity of their ranch, they had traveled a long, hard road. But every step had been worth it because it had led them to each other, to this life, to this moment. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Thomas grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's green eyes and fierce determination. He took over more of the ranch work, allowing Xander to slow down as his body began to show the wear of decades of hard labor. Alina became a teacher in Prescott, using her sharp mind and patient nature to educate the next generation. Zelda and Xander grew older together, their hair graying, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They still worked the ranch, though at a slower pace, and they still sat on their porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, Xander took Zelda's hand and said, "Do you ever regret it?" "Leaving Chloride the way we did?" "Not for a second," Zelda said. "Do you?" "No, but I sometimes wonder what happened to Thornton, whether he ever got what he deserved." "I do not care what happened to him. He does not matter anymore. He never really did. What mattered was that we found each other, that we built this life together." Xander smiled and kissed her hand. "You are right, as always." "I know." They laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet evening, and Zelda leaned her head against his shoulder. She thought about the young saloon girl she had been, frightened and alone in Chloride, and how a cowboy named Xander Voss had walked into her life and changed everything. He had been her protector, her justice, her salvation. But more than that, he had been her partner, her love, her home. When Marshal Devine had said no law would help a saloon girl, Xander had responded by becoming her justice himself. But in the end, what he had really given her was not justice but love, and that had made all the difference. Thomas eventually married a woman from Prescott named Catherine, and they gave Zelda and Xander 3 grandchildren who filled the ranch with laughter and chaos. Alina married a doctor and moved to Phoenix, but she visited often, bringing her own children to run wild on the land their grandparents had built. The ranch passed to Thomas when Xander's health finally forced him to fully retire. But Xander remained involved, offering advice and telling stories to the grandchildren who adored him. Zelda spent her later years surrounded by family, her days filled with the simple pleasures of cooking for her grandchildren, tending her garden, and sitting on the porch with Xander. She had never been happier, never felt more fulfilled, and she marveled at how different her life had turned out from what she had once expected. On a warm spring evening, when Zelda was 71 years old, she and Xander sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter ringing through the air. "This is a good life," Xander said softly. "The best life," Zelda agreed. "I am glad I stayed in Chloride long enough to meet you." "I am glad you punched Marcus Thornton in the face," Xander laughed, the sound warm and rich. "That was a good moment, was it not? The best moment." "Well, second best. The best was when you said you would be my justice. And I was I not? You were everything I needed and more." She turned to look at him, at his lined face and gray hair, and the eyes that still looked at her with the same love and devotion they had held 40 years ago. "Thank you, Xander, for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me. Thank you for letting me. Thank you for seeing something worth loving in a drifter with a gun and too much anger." "I saw you," Zelda said simply. "The real you beneath all the armor, and I fell in love with what I found." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, their hands clasped together, their hearts beating in tandem. Around them, their family continued to laugh and play, living the life that Zelda and Xander had fought so hard to create. Years later, when both Zelda and Xander had passed on, their children and grandchildren would tell the story of how they met. They would talk about the saloon girl and the cowboy, about Marshal Divine who said no law would help her, and about how Xander Voss had declared he would be her justice himself. They would talk about the fire in Chloride, the escape to Prescott, the ranch that had grown from nothing into something substantial and lasting. But mostly, they would talk about the love that had sustained Zelda and Xander through every hardship, every challenge, every joy. They would talk about how that love had created a family, a legacy, a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other against all odds. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations, and on the porch where Zelda and Xander spent so many evenings, there is a plaque that reads, "Built on Love and Justice, 1885. It is a simple memorial to an extraordinary love story, to two people who found each other in the wild, unforgiving West and created something beautiful that would last long after they were gone." In the end, Marcus Thornton faded into obscurity, his mind eventually failing, his influence diminishing until he was just another forgotten man in a territory full of forgotten men. But Zelda and Xander Voss became legends in Prescott, remembered not for violence or wealth but for the quiet strength of their love and the family they built together. Their story became one that parents told their children, that grandparents shared with grandchildren, a reminder that even in the hardest times, even in the wildest places, love could flourish. That justice was not always found in courtrooms and badges, but sometimes in the heart of one person willing to stand up for another. That the best revenge against cruelty and fear was not violence but survival, happiness, and a life well lived. Zelda Kane had been a saloon girl with no prospects and no hope, terrorized by a powerful man that the law would not touch. Xander Voss had been a drifter with a violent past, and no reason to stay in one place. Together, they became something neither could have been alone. They became home for each other, justice for each other, salvation for each other. And in the end, they proved that sometimes the greatest act of justice is simply choosing to love, to build, to create something good in a world that often seems determined to destroy it. Their love was their justice, their revenge, their triumph, and it echoed through generations, a testament to the enduring power of two hearts that refused to give up on each other or on the possibility of happiness. The Arizona sun still rises over the ranch they built, warming the land they nurtured, and in the quiet of those mornings, you can almost hear the echo of their laughter, the whisper of their conversations, the enduring presence of a love that conquered fear, defied injustice, and proved that even in the Wild West, even when the law offered no help, love could be the greatest justice of all.